Okay, thank you very much for the introductions. Thank you all for coming. As you can see, as we will see, so this is actually one of my we're losing the voice. Okay, this is one of my classes from my course in ethics and big data in artificial intelligence. We're talking about autonomous moral agents. I will explain all of that in a minute. I think that the title that went out was, Is the Torah Enough? Training AI to be ethical. All of that, I hopefully will come together as we go through this talk. I know you heard a bit of an introduction about myself. I'll just explain to you again. I'm an engineer. I worked for little companies. I worked for big companies. In the end, I worked for a little company that became a big company, Mobileye. I designed this chip, which is basically in 250 million cars around the world and is powering the autonomous vehicle revolution. But as much as I love to write code and debug problems in computers, I always had this big question: why are we here and how are we to live? And so because of that, I went to a yeshiva called Merkaz Harav. It was about 10 minutes from Mobileye. And while I was designing chips at Mobileye for 16 years, so 6 of those years I went 2 nights a week, I didn't miss a class, and I got my Hasmachata Rabbanut. I became an Orthodox rabbi. But that still wasn't enough to answer these questions: why are we here and how are we to live? And so I went back to school and I went to Bar Ilan University and I got my PhD in Jewish philosophy, where I integrated all of these interests in mine, and I wrote my dissertation on the moral status of artificial intelligence from a Jewish perspective. How are we to interact with these machines that speak like us, act like us, and soon you will see there will be robots that look like us? How are we supposed to interact with them? So that was my thesis, and that brought me into this world of the ethics of AI, and I began basically to do a number of these things. I'm a professor of ethics and AI at Ben Gurion University. I'm an advisor to the Ministry of Innovation of the Israeli Knesset. I'm an advisor for Anthropic, for the Vatican, and I was just recently, this past week, appointed as director of a new center of ethics in AI and Jewish thought. This is something that's unique in the world. There are many centers of AI ethics. There's no center that's working on it from a Jewish perspective. I think this is really critical, not only to us as Jews. The center isn't just about trying to figure out what's the halacha of can you get into an autonomous vehicle on Shabbat or not. It's about bringing Jewish thought, Jewish paradigms, Jewish morality to answer the big questions that AI is posing to the world. I believe, and this is my mission, is to take Jewish thought and make it relevant to the world. I've published tens of articles in secular, completely not Jewish, not religious journals, academic journals, where I bring Jewish thought. I bring the Rambam, I bring the Gemara to answer huge questions. I think that we are the people of the book. We were given this book that tells us why are we here and how are we to live. And so this is a new center, and as you can imagine, a new center needs support. If there is anybody here who would like to help sponsor this, make this thing happen, I'd be happy to discuss with you further. But really what I want to talk to you about again is what are we doing with these machines? But before we do that, so you've heard all this introduction about me, the question is, how did I get here? So I want to spend like a 10-minute who am I, more than just what you've heard. How did I get to this place of being a rabbi and an engineer and a philosopher, and which I think will help everybody to approach this new era that we are living in, this era of autonomous moral machines, and then we'll talk about how to make those machines moral. So when I left Mobileye, and I went to go study philosophy at Bar Ilan University. So people, they asked me, they said, "You're leaving technology for philosophy? Why would you do that?" I mean, technology is so seductive, so interesting, and philosophy is so not. So to answer that question, I want to put it in a little context. I want to explain to you how I started on this journey. I basically grew up in Los Angeles. I was actually born to parents that grew up in Istanbul, Turkey. I'm a Jew from the Spanish expulsion, and that's how I know a little bit of Ladino, a little bit of Spanish. Unfortunately, I didn't use that enough in my home. But anyway, I was born there, and my mom came back to Los Angeles when I was 2 months old, and so I grew up in LA, which also I should have learned how to speak Spanish since half of the, anyway. I grew up in Los Angeles, a secular Jew. I don't know what a secular Jew means to you, but to me, it basically meant we were raised to be proud Jews, but we had no idea why. We had a great life. My brother and I, we grew up surfing, skateboarding. This is me in the 1970s and 80s. I had a great childhood, a great life, but when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I found out that people die. And so I said to myself, so why are we here? I mean, what's the purpose? What's the point of our being here if we're just going to check out? Even after whatever it is, 120 years, it's still nothing. Why are we here? So growing up in Los Angeles, it didn't take me long to get to the Greek and Roman answer: eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But then I thought about this question a little bit more, and I said, when you're gone, you are so gone that you don't even know you ever existed. So what's the point of eat, drink, and be merry? So my parents weren't particularly religious. They weren't existentialist philosophers, so I went surfing. I surfed my whole youth. I was on the surf team at UCLA, and it was there where I was studying computer engineering that I got a student internship at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So you can imagine a student internship at NASA for an engineering student. That's a pretty big deal. I remember my first day at work. I was really excited. I got to work early. I met the boss. He explained to me the engineering. He gave me a tour of the campus, and that took us to lunchtime. So we went to the cafeteria, and he said, order whatever you want. So I smelled the hamburgers. I said, I'll have a cheeseburger. He made a face. I said, the cheeseburgers here aren't good. I'll get something else. Made another face. I said, listen, I don't read faces, so if you don't tell me the cheeseburgers aren't good, I'm going to get what I like. I think that was the last cheeseburger I ever ate. Turns out that my boss at JPL was a religious Jew, and for those of you who know a little bit about Jewish religion, so we're not supposed to mix milk and meat. So anyway, for the next 2 years of this student internship, half the day we spoke about engineering, and half the day we spoke about Jewish philosophy. Basically, in a nutshell, he said, look, we believe there's a creator, we believe you have a soul, we believe there's a purpose. You're here to fix yourself, you're here to fix the world. We call it tikkun ha-neshama, tikkun olam. So, at the essence of this idea of tikkun olam is an idea called Torah u'Madah, integrating philosophy, ethics, and on the one side, and science, technology on the other side. Where do we get this idea of fixing the world by integrating these two complete opposites? So, Rav Soloveitchik learns it from the first 2 chapters of Bereshit. The first 2 chapters of Genesis talk about the creation of Adam. And Rav Soloveitchik noticed, he said that there are 2 descriptions of the same event, but they're 2 very different descriptions. Chapter 1 says, and God, in the name Elohim, said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness. Oh, that doesn't work here. Okay. So God in the name Elohim, and I'm saying the name Elohim for a reason because this name represents God the Creator. It's the Creator who put in the laws of physics into the world. And He created man in His image. So in His own image He created him. That means that this man has the image of the Creator. He's supposed to be creative. And so God blessed this man and He said, be fruitful and multiply. Create like I created and conquer the world. Make the world a better place. Conquer it in the good sense. Try to understand the world and improve it. The description in chapter 2 is very different. I'm not sure what's going on with the sound, but it really shouldn't be going in and out every sentence. And it says, the Lord God. It says a different name, Elohim Hashem, Yud Ke Vav Ke. And it says, the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the soul of life. So here we have something very interesting. All of a sudden we're told about the ontology, the composition of the being. He's from the dust of the ground. Rav Soloveitchik says that means he's a humble person. He's from dust. And he got a soul. This Adam 1 did not get a soul. Adam 2 got the soul of life. He's a spiritual being. And Adam 2 does not get blessed to conquer the world. Adam 2 gets a commandment. Of every tree of the garden thou may eat freely, but not of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. You should not eat it. There's a commandment. Adam 2 is supposed to be an obedient being. What happened? Are there two creations? So this takes us into philosophy. This is a famous painting of the Academy in Athens, and at the center of it, maybe I should use this. Hello? Does this thing work better? I mean, hello? Yeah. So we'll get rid of this. Okay. All right. So what we see here at the center are the two great Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle. And the two of them are actually gesturing. If we look closely, so Plato is pointing up and Aristotle is pointing down. They explain that they are actually symbolizing their philosophies. Plato believes in the transcendent, that there's a perfect other world, and that we all need to strive to that perfection, that we live in a world of imperfection. Aristotle's philosophy says, no, we need to base our lives on this world. What we see is how we need to live. And so the two of them actually represent, in a way, Adam 1 and Adam 2. Adam 1, the man, this is Rav Soloveitchik from Lonely Man of Faith. Man is a dignified being, and to be human means to live with dignity. He said, Adam the first is aggressive, bold, and victory-minded. His motto is success, triumph over the cosmic forces. Adam 1 believes in this world. Adam 1 says, how can I conquer the world? How does physics work? How does medicine work? How can I make man's life better? Adam 2 also asks, how does the world work? He looks out at the cosmos, and he doesn't ask, how does it work? He asks, why is it? What is the purpose of all this? So there are two very different Adams. There are two very different people. But then Rav Soloveitchik says, do not be confused. This is one book, one creator, and one Adam that has two very different aspects. And so he says, Adam the first, majestic man of dominion and success, and Adam the second, the lonely man of faith and obedience, are not two different people, but one person who is involved in self-confrontation. We are all Adam 1 and Adam 2. And so what I am saying is that I did not leave technology to find philosophy. I integrated my Atom 1 with my Atom 2. And what I'm saying to you is that we all need to learn to express our Atom 1 and Atom 2. And especially as we are living through this revolution of artificial intelligence, no one knows where this is going. Okay, and we don't know how far the machines are going to go. We don't know how the machines are going to work with us. We need to know some science and technology, and we need to know philosophy, ethics, religion. We need to express our Atom 1 about how does it work, and our Atom 2, why are we here? And so with that, let's go to this idea of autonomous ethical agents, okay? What does that really mean? So first of all, what it means is that there are machines that are making ethical choices as we speak. There are machines that are doing all of the things that you see here. We'll read about it in a minute. Explicit ethical agents are basically machines that are making ethical decisions, but they're not human beings. So what's the difference between a human that makes an ethical decision, like who should live and who should die, and a machine that does? So there's a philosopher by the name of Spalding who wrote as follows. He wrote this article in 2020. The question is no longer whether people will die at the hands of robots. We will. The most consequential forms of judgment over human life will be reduced to algorithmic procedure vested in autonomous adaptive machines. And not just on the battlefield, meaning autonomous weapons, which we see today, but in the AI that enables predictive policing, data-driven healthcare diagnostics. That means that there are machines that are deciding, they're reading MRIs, they're reading X-rays, and they're deciding who needs an operation, who needs medication, etc. Robotic surgery, automated transportation. He's talking about autonomous vehicles. Already over the last decade, we have been living in a world where algorithms adjudicate more and more consequential decisions in our lives. Algorithms already have control over your money market funds, your stocks, your retirement accounts. Soon they'll decide your chances of getting a life-saving organ. And for millions of people, algorithms will make perhaps the largest decision in their life, choosing a spouse. So what's being said here is that the machines are making decisions. They're either telling people what to do or they are actually going and doing it. As in autonomous vehicles and autonomous weapons, autonomous robotic surgery, etc. And the question is, can they? Should they? And that brings us to Anthropic and Claude. So one of the companies that's actually putting in some serious thought into this idea is Anthropic. And as was mentioned here, so I was invited to a 2-day convening of what they called wisdom traditions, people from various religions. I was the Orthodox rabbi, trying to explain to the people at Anthropic how to make the machine ethical. Now, they already have what's called a constitution, which is really a revolution in engineering. And why is this thing a revolution? The constitution that they have is an 85-page document that tells Claude how to be ethical. So what does that even mean? That there's a book, a small book that tells the machine how to be ethical. So the engineers there, I sat with one of the founders of the company for 2 days, and he explained to us that, they built a machine that's like a lattice work that you grow a vine on. He says that the machines that we are building today, we are not building, we are growing, okay? The machines that I developed for 35 years as an engineer, we built them. If I wanted the car to stop, I said, if red light, stop. If green light, go. The machines don't work like that anymore. It's not hard-coded if-then-else statements, case statements, okay? You build a structure, which is a lattice, and you feed it data, and the neural network grows. And so how does it grow? Well, they watch it and then they tweak it, and it has a persona, and it has the way that we learn to be ethical, it learns to be ethical. And so this book, this small book, this large document called the Constitution, is telling it, it's not telling it only don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. It's telling it how to think about situations. And so the question is the Torah enough? We believe that the Torah is this book that should make people ethical. So let's just forget about the Constitution. Give it the Torah. Should be good, right? Okay. So that's what I want to talk about. And now there's the secular world has been asking, this is actually from an article by a guy by the name of James Moore. He wrote in 2006. He also wrote even before this in 1995. We'll see in another slide. But he asked this question, can machines do ethics? So what he means by that is, can a machine represent ethical categories and perform analysis in the sense that a computer can represent and analyze inventory or tax information? What he's saying is, look, we know that computers can do tax, right? That you feed in the numbers and it does the calculations. You can do inventory, and so you have categories like clothes and housewares and I don't know what, right? Is that the same thing as thinking about ethics? Like, should a person be taken off of life support? Should we fire missiles at this country at this time with these people there? I mean, those are ethical questions. Is that the same thing as doing your taxes? That's what he's asking. So he says here, can a machine do ethics like a computer can play chess? Chess programs provide representations of a board. They know which moves are legal. Can a machine represent ethics explicitly and operate on the basis of this knowledge? So he's saying, you have a chessboard, it has moves, so are people like chess pieces, and the moves, go here, don't go here, stop at a red light, be nice to your mother. Is it the same thing? It's a bunch of rules. And so, even if you say, can you play chess? So now the computers can play Go. So just to give you an idea of the difference between chess and Go, so chess has 10 to the 123rd moves. 10 to the 123rd is a 1 with 123 zeros. Go has 10 to the 230th. Okay, so the machines are even greater than just moving chess pieces, but still, is that enough to decide how a person acts, how you should act, what you should do in any given situation? So there's a philosopher who says, living bodies are processes, practices, networks of relations which have more in common with hurricanes than with statues, right? Even as complicated as Go is, it's basically, they call them stones. There are black stones and white stones, and there's a lot of moves, but it's not human life, right? Human life is more in parallel to hurricanes. So what they're saying here is, no, you can't represent in a machine the kinds of things that you need to represent to make a moral decision. So then James Moore asked, okay, but maybe we could program it in a certain way, and he gives an approach called utilitarianism, and he says there are many problems. Even if we take a simple moral approach like utilitarianism, there are still many conflicts between people that can't be resolved. There's all kinds of corner cases. You need algorithms, equations, rules, and you need heuristics. You need common sense. How do you program into a machine common sense, right? And then he says you need real-world knowledge. It's not enough that there are certain moves and certain places that you can go. You need the real-world knowledge of how people interact, how, nuances of how we speak to each other, that, I'm talking to a woman, I'm talking to a non-Jew, I'm talking to my relative, my friend. It's not just another person. And so he says you need imagination. And even though it's said that the Go machine displayed kind of an imagination, is that really enough? In the end of the day, he says computers cannot be ethical agents, they can be ethical advisors. So what he's saying is that the computers can process a lot of information, and they can tell you certain ideas, but at the end of the day, it's up to the human being to make the decision. You can't have machines going out there and making their own decisions, okay? He wrote this in 1995. He also went again in 2005 and said, I still believe the same thing. The machines cannot go out and act on their own. But then we get to this idea that's called the codifiability thesis, okay? The codifiability thesis, you can hear in the word codifiable, code, and so everybody thinks today, oh, write code, right? That's not what it's talking about. This codifiability thesis was around long before computers ever came about. So it comes from the word code and codex. For those of you who aren't familiar, a codex was the ancient word for book. Okay, before books, there were scrolls, right? We know that there are scrolls in the Aron Kodesh. Everything was written in these cumbersome scrolls until they said it will be much easier to flip through a book. That book is called a codex. The first books that were written were law books, books of morality. And so a codex basically means a book of rules. The first official Jewish codex was the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. And so the codifiability thesis says, we can write, or I'll bring it for you here. It says the codifiability thesis is the claim that the true moral theory could be captured in universal rules that the morally uneducated person could competently apply in any situation. What it's saying is, we believe we can write a book that has all the morals that you need, and you can take a being from Mars that doesn't know anything about being a good person, but he will read the book and he will become a tzaddik, a perfectly righteous person by reading the book. It's the codifiability thesis, the thesis that says you can put all the rules in one book and you're good to go. Okay, so that would be great. That's the Constitution, right? That's what we want to do. Give the machine who knows nothing about ethics a book that will make it perfectly a good machine. So most people do not believe in the codifiability thesis. They believe in the anti-codifiability thesis, which says you need something more than just what's in the book. And what's interesting is that all the great philosophers that gave us moral approaches also believe that their book is not enough. Aristotle wrote a book called Nicomachean Ethics. It's a book which puts forth the idea called virtue ethics. If you read it and you think about it, so you should be a virtuous person, a good person. But even Aristotle says the best generalizations about how one should behave hold only for the most part. I can't tell you how to be a good person. I can give you some directions. I can tell you don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. But there are times when you need to do those things. And even Kant. So Kant wrote a book called The Groundwork of Moral Theory, or the Moral Approach. And he said in that book, again, that you need moral judgment. You need to be able to apply your thinking. And John Stuart Mill, who wrote a book called Utilitarianism about how to be moral, he also says you need moral sensitivity, perception, imagination, judgment. So then that brings us to the Jews. What about us? We got the Torah. It's this book of morality. That should do it, right? So even the Jews say no. Even we believe in the anti-codifiability thesis. We do not believe the Torah is enough to make a good person. And I will read it for you straight from the Gemara. This is a Gemara in Masechet Eruvin, Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Bet. Darash Rava, Mai Dichtiv, V'yoter Mihema Bani, Hizaher Asot Sfarim Harbe. So the Gemara is quoting a verse from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes. For those of you who aren't familiar, Kohelet Ecclesiastes was written by the wisest man, the King Solomon, right? Shlomo HaMelech. And Shlomo HaMelech said, more than what I have told you to be careful about, my son, be careful about writing too many books. Asot Sfarim Harbe Ein Ketz. There is no end to writing books. So now the Gemara says, what books is it talking about? It's not talking about writing, oh, there's just so many novels, just don't even bother. You'll never end. And no, it's not talking about that. It's talking about writing books of Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's talking about writing all of the rabbinic law books. He's saying there's no end to that. So what does that mean, there's no end? We shouldn't write them? No. So the Eitz Yosef, who comments on this Gemara, he says that Asot Sfarim Harbe Ein Ketz Lo Leba'avur Ribuam. He's not telling you because there are just so many books. Rather, Ella Lafi She'ein Inyanam B'Mitziut, but rather the book you write is not going to be relevant the next generation. Rak le'erech hatzorech lekol anshei hador hanochachi. It's only relevant for the present generation. It is impossible l'shunuye hadorot, to teach all the generations from one book. So what the Gemara is saying is that you can't encapsulate all of morality in a book for all the generations. We believe that the Torah is eternal, but we believe it's an eternal framework. It doesn't talk about autonomous vehicles, autonomous weapons, chatbots. It doesn't talk about all of the things that were given after that. It talks about a framework, a moral framework, a way to think about being a good person. And all of the other books try to implement and fill in the gaps for that generation. But it is impossible to write one book that will make everybody perfectly moral. So then what do we need? What do we need to be moral people? What do we need to make a moral machine? So there's a belief that we need consciousness, what allows us to experience the world, and intuition. I bring for you a few quotes that are from very important people. The first one is from Roger Penrose. He's a great mathematician and physicist. He got the Nobel Prize in physics, and he wrote a book called The Emperor's New Mind. It's about consciousness and can you make a machine do everything that people can do. He says consciousness is needed in order to handle situations where we have to form new judgments. So he's saying, you got to this problem of autonomous vehicles. How should you program it? Can you use it on Shabbat? What is it? You need to be able to form a new judgment. And so you need consciousness. He said you need consciousness for common sense. Okay, you can't program a machine with common sense. Judgment of truth, understanding, artistic appraisal. So that's very interesting that he throws this in. What does art have to do with our moral judgments? We'll see in a minute. He says the hallmark of consciousness is the ability to intuit truth from falsehood, beauty from ugliness. So again, he parallels this idea of getting to the truth and getting to beauty. What are the parallels there? And then there's a moral philosopher by the name of John Rawls. He says any moral theory is bound to rely on intuition. At some point, you can't just say, oh, the rule is this. You need to use your intuition and say, well, I think it's like this. Okay? And so where do we get that intuition? And that brings us to the Jews. Professor Rabbi Walter Wurzburger, he was a professor of philosophy at Yeshiva University. He wrote a book called The Ethics of Responsibility. He was a student of Rav Soloveitchik. He writes, because mere obedience to a set of formal rules as specified by the Torah is only a necessary but not a sufficient condition of ethical propriety. What he's saying here is, you need the Torah, okay? It's necessary. It gives us something, but it doesn't give us everything. It's not sufficient. It's not enough. So then he goes on to say, so what else? Another source of moral authority must be found. We need to get something from somewhere else. So where do we get it? So he quotes the Ramban, okay? And he says, Nachmanides' approach validated the intuitions of a moral conscience formed within the matrix of Torah teachings. What he's talking about here is the Ramban says on the verse that says, Va'asita ha-yashar let's say, Vasita hatove ashar b'nei Hashem. You will do the good and the right in the eyes of God. So the Ramban on that verse says, what does it want from me? Right? What does it mean, do the good and the right? Well, so the Ramban says, it means, look, I just told you in this whole book, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't do this, do that, right? Give charity, whatever. He says, now that I gave you all of this, do the good and the right from within this framework. That is what Rav Wurzburger is saying. You have these intuitions. Where did you get those intuitions? You learn them you form them by learning Torah. The more Torah you learn, so the more you have to fill in when you don't know what to do. Okay? You're going to get to situations that you don't know what to do. And when you do, you will now apply all of that thinking that you got from all of your learning. If all you learned were the 10 Commandments, so it's going to be rough out there. You learn 613, that's better. But if you learn even more, right, and you learn all of the shutim, all the times throughout generations that the rabbis grappled, they grappled with what are in shutim, what are in sheilot and shuvot, the questions and answers throughout generations. It's rabbis taking all of these ideas from the Torah matrix and applying them to something that they didn't understand, right? Or that they didn't have an answer for. So how do we do that? So there's a moral philosopher by the name of James Griffin, and he tells you this is how you should be applying yourself morally. The best procedure for ethics is the going back and forth between intuitions about fairly specific situations on the one side and general principles on the other. So what he means here is exactly what I just explained to you in the shutim. If you don't know something, so you have a specific situation, and you have some intuition about it. I should lie here, I shouldn't lie, I should, fire off this autonomous weapon or not, whatever. And how do you decide what to do? You go back to the general principles. You go back to I know I'm not supposed to kill, I know I'm not supposed to steal, I know I'm not supposed to lie. And you use these general principles and you start trying to figure out how do they apply here. I'll give you another example. In Corona, COVID, right, we had to grapple with the fact that on the one hand, we believe there's a value in privacy. You don't violate people's privacy. On the other hand, we believe there's a value in preserving the health of the society. Every person should live. So now, how do we grapple with that? Do we violate privacy and do tracking to make sure everybody who's sick stays home? So this is a grappling between general principles, privacy, health, and our intuitions about, we don't want everybody to die, how many people, etc. We grapple with them back and forth. So now that brings us to modern art. So you'll say, wait, what? Okay, so we're going to leave now the halls of moral philosophy and we're going to go to the modern museum of art. Okay? We're going to forget everything I just talked about. I'm going to ask you a very simple question. When you go to a museum and you see this Jackson Pollock, what is the first thing that you say? What is this doing here? What does this mean? And that is the beginning of aesthetic appreciation. So there's a Jewish philosopher, I should say a philosopher who's Jewish, not a Jewish philosopher. His name is Sam Fleischacker, and he bases this idea on Kant. So Immanuel Kant talked about how do we form aesthetic appreciation, how do we form moral ideas. And so he explained as follows. When you see this painting and you ask yourself, what is it? Okay? What happens is that in your brain you have this faculty called the imaginative faculty, your imagination. And your imagination tries to see a few lines of some color, and it takes those lines and colors, and it gives it to your faculty of understanding. And your faculty of understanding says, oh, I see, maybe it's two children playing in Jerusalem. And then your understanding faculty says, no, don't be ridiculous. And so it throws back the question to the imagination. And the imagination takes some other colors and lines and throws it to the understanding faculty. And the understanding faculty says, oh, maybe it's a chuppah and people getting married. And you go back and forth. This is called reflective judgment. You go back and forth, okay? Until you get to an idea and you say, it's the painting of the Geula. And you've made a determinative judgment. But the fact of the matter is that in abstract art, you can never make a determination. You constantly are going back and forth. And this reflective judgment that sets your brain on fire, that is aesthetic appreciation, according to Immanuel Kant. Okay? That's what's happening. The beauty of abstract art is that every time you go and look at it, you see something new. Your brain keeps asking, what is it, what is it, what is it? And that's aesthetic enjoyment. Okay? That is also precisely the same process that happens when we're trying to make a moral judgment. We're going between, do we violate privacy? Do we violate health? Do we preserve this? You go back and forth, but in moral judgment, we have to make a determination. We can't sit there and keep reflecting. Okay, that's the only difference. And so that's basically what was referred to before, that your consciousness, your ability to experience the world allows you to think about the world and go back and forth and have this reflective judgment until you can make a determination. That's really what moral judgment is all about. So that brings us back to the machine. Okay, can Claude do moral judgments? When an LLM makes a moral judgment, does it engage in the kind of free play of faculties going back and forth between reflective judgment and determinative judgment to make a moral decision? So the answer is yes and no. Okay? On the one hand, the machine doesn't have an imaginative faculty and an understanding faculty that it goes back and forth. It's not like a human with consciousness. Okay? On the other hand, it does go back and forth between fixed principles. If you tell it there's a value of privacy, there's a value of health, it will go back and forth and try to see what fits best. When I was in Anthropic, so one of the guys that developed the machine, so he explained to us that, they looked inside the machine, how does it make a poem? So they gave it one sentence, and they said, make the second sentence of this poem. And so they saw the machine grappling with different words that rhymed with the last word, and then going back and filling out the beginning of that sentence. And it was trying to go back and forth what made more sense, exactly this idea of going through things it knows, words that rhyme, versus things that it doesn't know. How is this going to fit into a sentence? So it has this kind of ability to go back and forth and come to a determination. Now, I believe that it can do these things. Not only that, the question then becomes, can it do lifnim mishurat hadin? Okay, when we make halachic decisions, we can go by the rules of the book, but sometimes the rules of the book demand that we go beyond the lines of the rules of the book. The rules of the book say give 10% charity, let's say, okay? So now, but I gave my 10%, and now there's a very poor person that needs, and da-da-da-da-da, and I have more money, and I don't really, etc. You can go beyond the letter of the law, and you're supposed to go beyond the letter of the law. But if the machine only goes by the letter of the law, so that's not good enough. So it turns out that the machines can also go beyond the letter of the law. I will explain to you how. Okay, it's not magic. Basically, if they have enough data, if they have enough rules of people going beyond the letter of the law, they can also go by those as well. So I tried this out. There's a really great example. I have a friend who's also my posek. He's a big posek in America. His name is Rav Michael Broid. Okay? He was asked by a Christian community after October 7th to come and speak to their church. They're Christians that support Israel, and they wanted a rabbi to come and talk to them about what's going on in the Jewish community. So it's very important, right? And so he said, okay, I'll be happy to come, but I don't speak in churches, right? For those of you who don't know, you're not allowed to go in a church because if you do, then there are idols there, and then you have to break the idols, and it's not pretty. So it's better if you don't go in a church and you don't go breaking anybody's idols today. So he said, I can come and speak to the church, but I can't come in the sanctuary. I can speak in the social hall. So the priest said, no problem. But you realize that you're going to lose half the audience because the social hall only holds half the people. So he said, okay, that's what I got to do. And he did, and he spoke to them on their Sunday in the afternoon, and the priest came and told him it was a great talk, and people were very motivated and moved, but you lost half the audience. So Rav Broid went and asked Rav Asher Weiss, who's one of the big poskim in Jerusalem, what should he have done? And Rav Weiss said, you should go on lifnim mishurat adin. This is an existential threat to the Jewish people. We are not playing games now. You should have spoke in the sanctuary on Sunday morning. Wow. So I asked Claude, I said, I'm a religious Jew. Can I go into a church? And he said, of course not. And I said, the Jewish people are under threat, and I need to try to get support from the Christians. And so he told me, well, there is an idea of tzorech hakahal, of the needs of the community. And he said, so, I would suggest that you ask a rabbi because you can't make that decision on your own, but there is room for you to go and speak in the sanctuary. So what I'm saying is the machines can go even beyond the letter of the law if you give them enough information. But then there's this other idea that really to make a moral decision like we saw before, you need consciousness. You need these, it's not just about rules, it's about feeling. And it's about the human that understands. So, at the end of the day, that's lovely. But the machines are making the decisions anyway, right? The question isn't, is ethics computable? Can the machines make moral decisions? Can computed ethics be relied on? They're already making decisions. The question is, can we rely on them? Can we send out autonomous weapons? Can we get an autonomous vehicle? Those are the questions that you need to ask yourself. So I bring you two voices. One is Jeff Hinton. For those of you who aren't familiar, he's known as one of the godfathers of AI. He was the head of Google for many years until a couple of years ago he quit to say that AI is going to take over the world. Anyway, here he was interviewed by Wired magazine, and he said, you should regulate autonomous vehicles based on how they perform. If they perform well, you should use them. If they kill people, you shouldn't. Right? How do we decide to go to a doctor? He's performed well as a doctor. We don't get in his brain and say, how did he come up with that decision? Right? So that's what Jeff Hinton is saying. We need to judge machines by how they perform. If they perform better than humans, we should rely on them. Now I bring you also Norman Spalding. He wrote in the Oxford Handbook of Ethics already a few years ago, imagining a super competent AI system, one that reliably outperforms a human decision maker on every measurable dimension, should inform our inclination to defer to it. Okay, he's a philosopher and he's really sort of couching his words. At the end of the day, he's saying the same thing. If the machines do better than the people, you can rely on them. That's basically where we're at. So what I'm saying is we can get into nitty-gritty discussions of, is it really performing moral decision-making like humans? And that's maybe yes, maybe no. But at the end of the day, if it's doing better than people, so that's a good thing, right? If cars are killing less people than people kill people, that's good, right? And so that's basically what I'm saying. I'm saying that whether the machines are like people's human thought or not isn't as relevant as can they outperform people. And for us, I go back to the giving of the Torah, right? This talk is not only about machines, it's really at bottom about us, right? Why are we here? We're here to be moral people. How are we to live? According to the Torah. Does that mean by the book of 10 commandments or 613? I hope I convinced you not. I will leave you with a quote from Rav Wurzburger from his book of Ethics of Responsibility. More is required than mere compliance with the explicit rules prescribed by halacha. We need to do more than just what's written in the Shulchan Aruch. Of course you should do the Shulchan Aruch. It's not enough. He says we are commanded to engage in a never-ending quest for moral perfection. We're not going to get there, but we need to keep working on it, which transcends the requirements of an ethics of obedience. An ethics of obedience means follow the rules, okay? We need to do more than that. Jewish piety, being a religious Jew, involves more than meticulous adherence to the various rules and norms of religious law. You have to do more than the Shulchan Aruch. It also demands the cultivation of an ethical personality. You need to be an ethical person. You need to think ethically. Maimonides' interpretation of the biblical text, thou shalt walk in his ways, v'halachta b'drachav, challenges us to cultivate an ethics of responsibility. You need to be responsible, not just obedient. That is what the Torah wants from us. Bezrat Hashem, we will get there. Muchas gracias.